All rights reserved. We reserve all rights. Benito Mussolini said fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. Meet BlackRock and Vanguard. It is said that BlackRock and Vanguard own the world, and hence they own our governments. Bloomberg reports that they are on a race to $20 trillion in portfolio holdings. More importantly, they are the owners and controllers of the big pharma industry, and even more importantly than that, BlackRock and Vanguard own the world's mainstream media. In other words, Big Pharma owns the mainstream media, the same mainstream media that is now telling us. Despite cold snow-dwelling Inuit women having the same average lifespan of 83 years like everyone else, winter vaginas now suddenly cause heart attacks at a young age, and cold weather can damage your health. You'd better run out and get your winter vagina Twateral Flow Kit test in case you are at risk. Despite intermittent fasting being the biggest proven health benefit of all time, now suddenly skipping breakfast causes heart attacks. But if you don't skip breakfast, suddenly the world's most popular breakfast food, eggs, enhances your risk of blood clots. A general practitioner on the television warns us that right as energy bill prices are doubling, this may cause heart attacks and strokes. They tell us these energy bill rises could even cause ill health in our children, because we all have our children open up our energy bills and then ask them how they are going to pay for it with no job. They tell us that suddenly breathing, the only sure way to stay alive and the staple of ancient Vedic, yogic, and Taoist longevity practices, could raise your risk of a deadly heart attack, so don't breathe too much. In fact, if someone you know is having a heart attack, be sure to tell them, whatever you do, don't breathe. It will only make things worse. Did you know that despite being forced to do so every year, moving your clocks forward an hour in the spring is suddenly dangerous to millions of Brits with heart problems? Hopefully moving them backwards in the fall is the proven medical cure. Not just the mainstream media, but Harvard suddenly wants to remind us that marijuana is said to trigger heart attacks. Remember in the 1970s, when American teens all smoked more weed than Cheech and Chong and all dropped dead of strokes and heart attacks? Me neither, but cool story, bro. Women now suddenly have heart attacks over using sex toys and vibrators. Sorry guys, you may have given her a few orgasms, but when's the last time you banged her so good you gave her a heart attack? You need to step up your game. Unnamed scientists on ITV News are now suddenly warning that shaking your duvet cover while making your bed can increase your chances of a heart attack. Because though the heart can easily handle running a marathon, riding the Tour de France, or competing in an Ironman, even climbing Mount Everest, the stress of softly shaking something that weighs as much as 2 pillows is the final breaking point of human physical exertion. Christmas Eve now increases your risk of heart attack by 37%, putting a huge strain on our hearts, probably from all of the joy from giving and loving. Shoveling snow, heart attack, and sudden death. Eating lots of heart-healthy vegetables no longer reduces your risk of heart attack or stroke. Even though you've never heard of it, governments are suddenly spending money on bus posters to remind us that kids have strokes too. Totally normal. We are now regularly seeing sports games stopped as fans collapse in the stadium and get dragged out by paramedics. And you can hardly watch a sports game these days without the game being paused as an athlete collapses on the ground, clutching at their chest. Luckily, the Irish Examiner tells us for the first time in sports history, referee whistles may be cause to sudden increase in heart problems among sports players. Not only that, but referee whistles may also be causing incidents in sports fans attending games, like this fan, who collapsed all the way up in the upper top deck of the Graham Taylor stand. That's one hell of a whistle. It's amazing it didn't liquefy the hundreds of people in its path. But they assure us all of these incidents are non-vaccine related, so the public has been urged to ignore misinformation recently circulating on social media platforms, but rather believe in a ludicrous claim that referee whistles suddenly cause strokes and heart attacks after 160 years of regular use with no problems. What is even more unbelievable than that excuse is that the general public and mainstream media keep asking the question, why are so many athletes inexplicably collapsing? As if they can't recognize the blatantly obvious. So let's lay it out in black and white to clear up the confusion once and for all. The U.S. Center for Disease Control recently admitted on their own website that the COVID-19 vaccines cause myocarditis and myopericarditis. Myocarditis is an inflammation of the heart muscle, or myocardium. The inflammation can reduce the heart's ability to pump and cause rapid or irregular heart rhythms, or heart arrhythmias. Severe myocarditis weakens the heart so that the rest of the body doesn't get enough blood. Blood clots can form in the heart, leading to a stroke or a heart attack. Pericarditis is the inflammation of the pericardium, which is the membrane that surrounds the heart. So myopericarditis is the inflammation of both the muscular wall of the heart and its enveloping membrane. The CDC tells us evidence from multiple safety monitoring systems in multiple countries supports the finding of an increased risk of myocarditis and myopericarditis following mRNA COVID-19 vaccination. They tell us that it happens more following the second dose than the first dose, and that the onset clusters usually happen within a few days of vaccination, mostly within the first week. They also tell us that it happens more often in adolescents and young adults, which explains why local newspapers around the world are filled with stories of young children and teens suddenly dropping dead of heart attacks and strokes. The average person thinks it's only happening to a kid or two in their own community because they only read the local paper, and the mainstream media is not reporting that it is happening worldwide. As the meme says, remember back in school when everyone started suddenly dying? Me neither. What is more worrying is that the CDC tells us cases have tended to be clinically mild. Yet Dr. Rogers tells us myocarditis is irreversible. Once the heart muscle is damaged, it cannot be repaired by the body. It is a devastating condition. Over the course of several years, many of those children will die. Dr. Anthony Hinton, a consultant surgeon with 30 years' experience in England's National Health Service, points out that myocarditis has a 20% fatality rate after just 2 years and a 50% fatality rate after just 5 years. Dr. Hinton explains that you cannot have mild myocarditis in the same way you can't be a little bit pregnant. So while this CDC whitewash is meant to be reassuring, it means nothing. Current myocarditis fatality statistics show 70% of those people may be dead within 5 years. Before you panic, much of that may very well be attributed to the poisonous medical treatments that allopathic doctors and hospitals are trained to treat myocarditis with. So there may very well be homeopathic and dietary ways to extend life much longer. Maybe even regenerate dead heart tissue after all. But why not just avoid giving yourself myocarditis with a COVID injection, just in case? The U.S. VAERS, or Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is where doctors, hospitals, and people go to report vaccine damage. Unfortunately, due to its long and complicated filing format, a study has shown that only an estimated 1% of all adverse reactions ever even get reported on VAERS. As of February 18, 2022, we can see that in the U.S. alone, 34,448 cases of myocarditis and pericarditis have been reported after taking the COVID-19 mRNA injections. At just 1%, a worst-case scenario could be closer to 3.4 million people. What is even worse is that several months before these so-called mRNA COVID-19 vaccines were even given to the general public, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, whose job it is to monitor the safety of these vaccines and either approve or decline their use after looking at the clinical trial data, published on their own website that they would be monitoring COVID-19 mRNA vaccines for a list of 22 bullet points with over 30 adverse reactions, meaning severe health damage, that they were expecting these vaccines to cause after seeing them occur in the clinical test trials. Sure enough, the 10th one down on the left was myocarditis and pericarditis. They knew months before this was released to the general public that this would happen. Just above it, acute myocardial infarction, a fancy name for a heart attack. A few above that, sure enough, they were expecting these injections to cause strokes. Also, thrombocytopenia, a blood disease characterized by an abnormally small number of platelets in the blood, which is used as an indicator that heart failure is near. Under that, the FDA lists disseminated intravascular coagulation, a serious condition that leads to excessive and abnormal blood clotting throughout the body's blood vessels, which leads to thrombosis, which causes heart attacks and strokes. Under that, we have venous thromboembolism, also known as venous thrombosis, or deep vein thrombosis, when a blood clot forms in the deep veins. Again, thrombosis causes heart attacks and strokes. Has the penny dropped yet? How about multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, a newly made-up condition affecting children with recent alleged infection or exposure to coronavirus disease 2019, or COVID-19. Pretty weird that the vaccine itself was expected to cause the exact same newly created disease they blamed on this new alleged virus. It has some clinical features resembling Kawasaki disease and toxic shock syndrome. Now, why would an experimental vaccine be causing toxic shock syndrome in children if it didn't have toxic ingredients in it? And what is Kawasaki disease? Kawasaki disease is a children's disease. Medium-sized arteries throughout the entire body become swollen and inflamed, including the coronary arteries, which supply the heart with blood. This in turn causes, surprise, surprise, blood clots, which cause heart attacks. It also causes inflammation of the heart muscles, or myocarditis, and heart rhythm disorders, or heart arrhythmia. Does this sound familiar? The American College of Cardiology did a 6-month study on the association of myocarditis with the BNT162b2 vaccine in children, which is a COVID-19 vaccine, and concluded myocarditis typically occurred in male child patients after the second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Speaking of the Pfizer BNT162b2 vaccine, a confidential cumulative analysis of reported post-vaccine adverse event reactions prepared by Worldwide Safety is pretty shocking. As we scroll down to page 30 of the report, we see 9 pages in a row of nearly 1,000 or more diseases caused by this one vaccine alone, never mind the strokes and heart attacks.
Now you got this guy in room 4 who got his second dose of vaccine on Tuesday, has been short of breath. Okay, now his BNP is elevated, D-dimer elevated, ALT, all his liver enzymes are elevated. His PTINR is elevated.
He's got problem myocarditis.
Yes.
He's got problem myocarditis.
Yes.
Oh, this is bullshit.
And now let's see.
It's probably myocarditis due to the vaccine.
Right.
But now they're not going to blame the vaccine.
Well, and you know what? But he has an obligation to report that, doesn't he?
Oh,
it
yes.
happened. Right. What is it? 60 days after, if you see anything?
They have got to.
But how many people are reporting?
They are not reporting.
Right.
Because they want to shove it under the mat.
My name is Sucharit Bhakti. I'm a physician and scientist. This magic bullet, the jab, is supposed to cause your immune system to explode into action and combat the virus. We have always had deep concern that this explosion would set off chain reactions leading to formation of blood clots in your vessels. Clots that no one can see, but they can feel it. If the clots form in your brain, you have splitting headaches, nausea, vomiting, paralysis, so many things that so many people have been reporting. How to find out? You see, there's a lab determination, the D-dimers, that if they go up in your blood, it is proof that clot formation has taken place in your vessels. Now, a number of German doctors have been measuring the D-dimers in the blood of patients before vaccination and days after vaccination, irrespective of symptoms. And they have just found out that triggering of clot formation is a very common event with all vaccines, meaning that when you take this jab, you are allowing your body, you are triggering a reaction that is potentially lethal. Therefore, I strongly advise people not to get the shot. If you want to, as an adult, you may, but you must realize that you are undergoing a threat. Do not give the shot to children, because they are absolutely without any possibility of defending themselves. If you give that jab to your child, you are committing a crime. If you give that jab to your child, you are committing a crime.
In fact, yes, the FDA did admit they were expecting death as one of the side effects of these COVID-19 injections. And so far on the U.S. VAERS, 24,402 COVID-19 vaccine-caused deaths have been reported in the U.S. alone. At an estimated 1% reported, that could be a worst-case scenario of 2.4 million deaths already. Which leads us to the million-dollar question. Do you really think that it's just a coincidence that the same year BlackRock and Vanguard owned Big Pharma conned half the world into taking a series of lethal, poisonous injections that admittedly cause strokes, heart attacks, and death via at least 10 different biological triggers, that suddenly BlackRock and Vanguard-owned mainstream media is hell-bent on blaming strokes, heart attacks, and deaths on the Omicron variant, breathing too many times a day, skipping breakfast, eating eggs for breakfast, using sex toys, smoking weed, cold weather and winter vagina, the weather in general, climate change.
How dare you!
Energy bills going up, taking aspirin, setting your clocks forward 1 hour, shaking your duvet too vigorously, celebrating Christmas, shoveling snow, and referees blowing whistles. Really?